Oh, cool. Let's go to Skype and bring in David Hale. He's a college football reporter for ESPN.com. And we're going to talk primarily ACC football with David Hale. David, welcome to the show.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me.
Doing just great. Thank you. David, I want to start off by looking at an overview of the ACC here. Would it be accurate to say that the ACC is in a period of transition for two reasons? Number one, lost a lot of star players, including Jameis Winston, Duke Johnson, etc. And number two, you look at the preseason rankings, and there's only one ACC team in the top 10, only two in the top 20, and only three in the top 25. So back to my question, a transition year?
Yeah, I think, to be honest with you, I think there's actually more depth of talent in the ACC this year than there has been in a while, top to bottom anyway. But I think there's not an elite team this year, and that's the big difference between the ACC now and really the last 3 or 4 years. So when you start talking about top 25 and you start talking about playoff projections, the ACC seems like the team that's left out, and that's really where the problem is for the league. I was actually putting together our all ACC preseason team today, and it's amazing how many sophomores and juniors are on that list and how few seniors. So it's a younger crop of stars in the league. I think with a number of teams, they could reach a higher ceiling than they are probably projected right now. But as you said, that at this point, it's not a great year for the league in terms of having that elite team that's going to fight for a playoff spot.
David, you and I have never met, so allow me to ask you a personal question.
David, consider yourself lucky, by the way.
If you will humor me, are you married?
I am.
Please don't tell me that you are Skyping from your bedroom, because if you are, there's an Eagles poster behind you, you're not going to be married very long.
Yeah, no, this is my office where all of the stuff my wife doesn't want to look at elsewhere ends up. So all of my stuff that used to hang in my half-painted apartments and whatnot through the years is now made its way crammed into my office.
In some ways, and getting back to the ACC, because you're in SEC country, do ACC fans kind of feel like second-class citizens living in that area with so much attention that goes to the SEC?
Yeah, 100%. There's definitely sort of that middle child syndrome a little bit with the ACC. It's Florida State fans, they've got a whole meme about FSU Twitter and how angry they always are on Twitter. And I think part of it is, hey, listen, we're an elite team. Don't judge us by the rest of our company that we keep. I think Clemson to some extent feels that way too. But, I covered UGA for a long time, and it was amazing how much more attention Georgia got than Georgia Tech. I think South Carolina probably gets about as much, if not more, attention than Clemson within the state, even when South Carolina is not as good. So, yeah, I mean, there's definitely a feeling of that we're fighting for the same recruits. We're, playing in essentially the same geography. We have fan bases that really overlap, but one league has a lot more national cachet than the other does.
Our guest is David Hale. He writes college football for ESPN.com. David, you mentioned Florida State. Yes, they have been the elite team in the ACC for a few years now, but has the rest of the league lessened the gap with FSU?
Yeah, I think when you talk about a year in transition, it's particularly true for FSU this year because Jimbo Fisher's brought in top 10 recruiting classes year after year after year. So there's a lot of talent on the roster, but when you start looking at experience, that's really lacking for Florida State. So I don't know in terms of talent gap how much has been closed. I think it's still FSU and Clemson and then everybody else. But in terms of experience, which I think is where some of that talent gap can be made up, there are teams that are probably much better suited than Florida State is right now. I mean, offensively, if Dalvin Cook doesn't end up playing, which is a real possibility at this point, they might not have a single guy starting for them who has started more than a half a season's worth of games in the past. So it's a team that really has a lot of stuff that they've got to work out offensively and on the defensive side of the ball too. They've seen a lot of guys leave and go to the NFL early, and that sort of evens the playing field too. So you look at a team like Virginia Tech or a team like Georgia Tech that's going to have a lot of more veteran players on both sides of the ball. Those teams, I think, they have a chance to catch up anyway. But talent-wise, I think FSU is still ahead of the curve.
Let's say, for the sake of argument, Florida State loses only one game this season, and you can pick whichever team it is. For the voters, will they look at the strength of the ACC this year and argue, Who have they played, and that's why they shouldn't play for the national title?
Yeah, I think 100%. I mean, it happened last year. Look, Florida State played 11 of 12 games in the regular season against Power 5 conference foes. They played Notre Dame, Oklahoma State, and Florida in the non-conference, which is unheard of that you see 3 games like that happen. And then they had to play Georgia Tech in an ACC championship game. And still, after all of that, at 13-0, there was a question of whether this is a team that belonged in the playoff. And it's because the teams that they played didn't hold up to their end of the bargain by being good. You know, Notre Dame was undefeated when they played them, but barely won 2 games the rest of the year. Miami was a decent team when Florida State played them, but didn't win another game the rest of the year. Playing fairly well in the opener, and then had some injuries and was not as good the rest of the year.
He's freezing up a little bit. Should we try and get David back real quickly? Yeah. Can we do that? Yeah. Because you asked an interesting question.
I did?
I know,
wow,
it's
that's
surprising.
a first.
If they were to lose a conference game, who would they be best off losing to and still continue
Clemson.
To stay?
They better lose to Clemson.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say.
Right.
I mean, Clemson had arguably the best defense in the country last year.
Right.
And they did lose a few guys, but they're still going to be a pretty good defense. And the preseason rankings, from what I saw, Clemson was still, 13, 14, 15, somewhere in there. Yeah. So you're still losing to a fairly highly ranked team. Can't imagine that would hurt FSU that much if they ended the season with just 1 loss.
Have you looked at their non-conference schedule?
I have not.
Okay. I haven't either, and apparently their non-conference schedule was great last year. I personally didn't think Florida State should be in the national title picture, despite going undefeated.
Really?
No. I think TCU would have beaten them. I think Baylor would have beaten them. I think one of those teams should have been in. And
well,
listen,
if they played the way they played against Oregon, yeah. Almost anybody could have beaten them.
And you know what? The Big 12 has its own problems because they should have a conference championship game, but they just don't want to have it. So they are rolling the dice every single year by not doing it. I thought TCU at the end of the year was the best team in the country, and they didn't even get a crack at it because, hey, we didn't want to have a conference championship game.
Yeah. TCU and Big 12 didn't have anybody in the in the championship Final Four.
That's right, because they didn't have a conference championship game, and they're still digging their heels in and saying, you know what, we don't need to do that. Okay.
Well, let me ask you something that we've discussed on this show before. The Big 12, I think they understand they need to expand.
Yep.
So they can have a conference championship game, and they will have a better chance of placing a team or two in the Final Four. Do you think CSU?
I knew you were going there.
Belongs in the Big 12.
Do they belong in the Big 12?
Yeah. Is that something CSU should want?
Oh, my goodness, they should want it.
Yeah,
of course they would want it.
And is something the Big 12 should want, CSU in the Big 12?
I'll give you one thing that makes Colorado State attractive to the Big 12. They get the Denver market.
Yeah.
That's one big thing in their favor.
And it is about TV markets, very much.
No question about it, and that's why I'm saying that. You know, Colorado State, though, needs to continue to build. You got to remember that Boise State was a nothing burger 10 years ago. But if you show sustained success, suddenly you become very attractive, like Louisville became very attractive as a football power. Boise State became very attractive as a football power.
Let's go right back to Skype and bring back David Hale. David, sorry about that. Skype froze up on us.
Hey, technology never get along well. So.
One last question before we let you go. The quarterback at Florida State, is it going to be Everett Golson, the transfer from Notre Dame? Is he going to replace Jameis Winston?
I'd be really surprised if it wasn't. Now, I mean, the knock at this point against him is he doesn't have the experience in the program. And, he doesn't have the playbook knowledge that Sean McGuire has in the program. But talent-wise, there's no question who the better quarterback is. And, I'm a firm believer that coaches, particularly at this level, don't take a final year transfer unless they think they can get out on the field and help them right away. I think that's exactly what will happen with Everett Golson.
How many times did you write the phrase crab legs last year?
I tried to just I got like the image on off of Google Images and just put it on Twitter. And that was my response. I didn't want to have to actually type it out anymore.
Did you eat crab legs while writing that story?
Oh, that would be messy.
I didn't, mostly because I think butter and keyboards is a problem generally, but I'm still a fan of crab legs.
Right.
I wouldn't let Jameis ruin that for me, at least.
You are not just eye candy, David. Very smart man.
David, do you think Jameis Winston is going to make the transition to NFL well?
Yeah, you know what? I think so, actually. I got to know him pretty well. And look, I mean, he did some really dumb things. I'm not going to argue with that. I think there was a lot more to him as a person than what tended to get reported on. And he's a smart kid. He's incredibly adept at football. I mean, he's got a really high football IQ, is one of the best I've ever seen at learning something off of watching film or drawing it up on the chalkboard and then taking it out of the practice field and doing it. He's really good at all that stuff. He is, I think, largely impressionable by the people that he's around. And in college, he was around maybe some of the not most mature guys in the world. I think putting him in a pro locker room around grown men who are doing this professionally, I think only helps that maturity process for him. On-field standpoint, I got no concerns about him. It's just a matter of whether he can grow up some.
Hey, David, is that one of the reasons things are so up in the air in the ACC? Because there's been a transition of quarterbacks throughout at least half the conference, right?
Yeah, and actually I think it has a chance to be a very good quarterback league this year, but there's a question mark at Florida State, certainly with Everett Golson. Clemson probably has the best of the bunch with Deshaun Watson, who I think is a legitimate Heisman contender if he can stay on the field, but he was hurt 3 different times last year. Brad Kaya at Miami might be the most talented guy in the league, but he's replacing most of his offensive line and pretty much his entire skill weapons from last year. So you start looking around the conference and you say the best quarterbacks really don't necessarily have the talent around them or have some big questions looming, and then the rest of the teams that sort of have the skill position talent established are having some question marks at quarterback.
David, again, appreciate your time. Sorry about the technical difficulties earlier, but we'll talk to you a little later in the year, hopefully, okay?
No problem. Happy to do it, guys. Thanks for having me.
What's your Twitter handle, by the way?
David Hale, ESPN.
That's easy. And we'll read you at ESPN.com as well. Thanks, David.
No problem.
David Hale, he writes college football, covers the ACC for ESPN.com. That portion of the big stuff brought to you by Grand Prix Motorsports. They're your source for the original motorcycle. That would be Indian motorcycles. So check out the newest line of Indian cycles at Grand Prix Motorsports. They're located on County Line in Santa Fe. You might even see Shannon there when you go by. That's her on her Indian motorcycle.